In this episode, we'll be diving into yet another batch of lesser-known cases from around the world that are bound to leave you questioning your faith in humanity. As if you needed more reasons. But being an Englishman, I of course have to talk about the weather first. Though it doesn't feel like it here in Kobe, for most of you, summer's already here. That means longer days and louder playlists. Whether you're planning to soak up the sun with your favourite music and podcasts, or want to have a crystal clear chat with friends, today's sponsor, Raycon, has you covered this summer with their everyday headphones. With a 40-hour battery life, these new and improved Raycon everyday headphones stand by you from sunup to sundown. And if you find yourself running low, just 15 minutes of charging yields 2 more hours of power. They truly live up to their name too, as honestly, I use these headphones every day for everything. No more switching sets for the gym or for Zoom calls. Their 360 immersive surround sound is immaculate, but my favourite feature has to be their hybrid active noise cancellation. I use it constantly when I'm walking through the city listening to The Cure and looking moody, or editing at home to block out the traffic noise. Since I live in a busy area, the feature's been a lifesaver. I just flip it on and boom, instant peace. And the fact that you get high quality noise cancellation for under $100? That's rare. So if you want to brighten up your summer with premium audio while helping to support the channel, now's a great time to grab a pair yourself. Head to buyraycon.com/masquerade15 or scan my QR code on screen now to get 15% off Raycon's best-selling headphones. Brought to you by Raycon. In the 80s and early 90s, New York City's nightlife scene pulsed with neon, glitter, and rebellious energy. At the centre of it all were the club kids, a group of flamboyant partygoers who blurred the line between performance art and public spectacle. Leading them was Michael Alec, a charismatic promoter who transformed underground raves into headline-grabbing events. But beneath the chaos and colour, something much darker was brewing. Michael Alec was born on April 29, 1966, in South Bend, Indiana. After his parents' divorce, Michael's early life was marked by a sense of otherness. He was a bright student, graduating near the top of his class, but he faced relentless bullying due to his homosexuality. Seeking acceptance and freedom, he moved to New York City in 1984 to attend Fordham University, later transferring to the Fashion Institute of Technology. There, Michael quickly embedded himself in Manhattan's underground club scene. He started out as a busboy at Danceteria, but soon made his name as a promoter at The Limelight, a deconsecrated church turned nightclub where customers flocked to worship live acts like Marilyn Manson, Grace Jones, and Cyndi Lauper. With the owner's backing, Michael created themed events that pushed boundaries and packed dance floors. He formed a tribe of creative misfits known as the Club Kids, a hardcore group of 24-hour party people, with members such as DJ Kyoki, Richie Rich, Jenny Talia, Michelle Visage, and even RuPaul. There are videos on YouTube of people doing excellent deep dives into Michael Alec's psychology, highlighting how he had a histrionic personality. It's no wonder then that while most of the members saw Club Kids as a safe space to have fun and be creative, Michael saw it as a means of transformation. To go from being a shy, quiet boy forced to live in the shadows and become something else entirely. A louder-than-life, attention-seeking monster. The Club Kids were as decadent as they were outrageous, and quickly became known for their elaborate, often grotesque costumes, and their mission to blur art, fashion, and nightlife into one disorienting experience. Together, they threw so-called outlaw parties. Dressed in costumes, they would storm public spaces like Burger King, Dunkin' Donuts, McDonald's, ATM vestibules, and even the New York City subway, blasting music from boomboxes and dancing until the police showed up. In one instance, Michael threw a party in a makeshift shantytown, paying the homeless residents in crack. Indeed, drugs were a constant presence, both as a lure for patrons and a staple for the Club Kids' own chaotic lifestyles. By the late 80s, Michael had supplanted Andy Warhol as a leading New York partier, but as he rose to notoriety, his antics escalated. He became known for urinating on guests and in their drinks, for throwing $100 bills onto packed dance floors to watch people fight for them, and for pratfalling into clubgoers, knocking them to the ground. Being a fan of horror movies, he and his cohort also hosted a blood feast themed event and decorated the limelight with fake severed limbs. In time, the club kids became talk show fodder, appearing on shows like Geraldo and the Joan Rivers Show. But behind the glitter was addiction. And to put things in a YouTube-friendly way, Michael began using E, H, and special K regularly. Around that same time, he grew close to a young drug dealer named Andre Melendez, better known by his party moniker, Angel, so nicknamed for the feathered wings that he wore as part of his signature look. Angel, hoping to be embraced as a fully fledged club kid, often gave Michael substances at a discount, and eventually ended up moving into his riverbank apartment on West 43rd Street. But their friendship deteriorated as Michael sank deeper into addiction and racked up a significant amount of debt. On March 17, 1996, Angel confronted Michael over unpaid drug money. Michael's other roommate and fellow club kid, Robert Riggs, aka Freeze, was also present. According to court testimony and Freeze's own confession, the argument inside the apartment erupted and escalated into violence, with Michael calling out for help. Freeze struck Angel in the head with a hammer 3 times, after which Michael tried to suffocate him with a pillow. According to Michael's own testimony, he also filled a syringe with Drano and injected Angel with it, then poured Drano down his throat and stuffed a rag in his mouth before duct taping it shut. He would later retract those details. Whether Angel passed from the hammer strikes, the chemicals, or asphyxiation remains unclear. Once he was well and truly gone though, the 2 killers stored his body in the bathtub. Michael covered Angel in baking soda, while the appropriately named Freeze filled the tub with ice. The pair then went right back to their substances. A week later, the stench from the bathroom had become unbearable. Freeze gave Michael 10 bags of H in exchange for dismembering the corpse. Michael, who agreed to the deal, cut off Angel's legs and packed them into a duffel bag, which he threw into a dumpster outside. The torso was placed in a box, which they sealed tightly and dumped in the Hudson River. In the weeks that followed, Michael continued partying and began confessing to people that he had killed Angel, going so far as to scrawl the word guilty on his forehead and accidentally making slip-ups during press interviews.
He was one of those copycats that we hate, so we killed him. I killed Angel, and that's the kind of thing that gets me in trouble.
Friends assumed that he was simply attention-seeking, as per usual, and that was definitely true. So were his confessions. It's clear a part of Michael wanted to be caught, if only because it would put his name on everyone's lips. Still, time passed without incident, and despite being so open about his actions, Michael no doubt thought that he had gotten away with everything. That is, until a group of children found a box washed up on Staten Island. They opened it and were greeted by the sight of a legless torso. The body remained unidentified for months, partly because the coroner misidentified the ethnicity, but also because of poor inter-borough communication. Meanwhile, Village Voice published a blind item alleging that Michael Alec was responsible for Angel's demise. In November 1996, Angel was finally identified through dental records, and the police began to take Michael Alec's boasts seriously. But before they could arrest him, he fled. He was found hiding in a motel in Toms River, New Jersey, and was taken into custody on December 5th, 9 long months after the slaying. Freeze was arrested soon after. The authorities were initially hesitant to charge Michael, as they wanted him to testify against his old boss, who had allowed employees to sell substances at the lighthouse, but public pressure twisted their arm. Despite claiming to have little memory of the event due to the drugs that they were on, both men took a plea deal, pled guilty to first-degree manslaughter, and were sentenced to 10 to 20 years in prison. With their reputation now in tatters, the club kids soon disbanded. Michael Alec's time behind bars was marked by instability. He was placed in solitary confinement for using substances because he found prison life too boring without them, and reportedly spent 5 years in isolation, where he wrote his memoirs, Aligula. Despite being in prison, he remained in the public eye, giving interviews and even dictating tweets through friends. He was denied parole twice, in part because of a failed drug test, but also because parole officers had seen the 2003 film Party Monster, a dramatization of Michael's life starring Macaulay Culkin. Finally, on May 5th, 2014, Michael was released on probation after serving 17 years. He tried to re-enter society, pursuing a career as an artist and media personality. He exhibited paintings and even released a song. Yet his return to public life was controversial to say the least. Critics questioned whether he truly felt remorse or whether he was simply capitalizing on his notoriety. Those question marks only multiplied when he'd say things like this during interviews.
What a nice place to dump a disposable body.
Oh, a great job. We should come back every year. You make
We should throw another body. We should throw a body over here.
Though he'd later brush this off as a dark joke, if you ask me, it's clear Michael hadn't used those years in solitary to reflect on his actions, and chose to use Angel's demise as a way to increase his own profile. All that's to say, if he couldn't have fame, he'd settle for infamy. On Christmas Eve, 2020, Michael Alec fatally overdosed in his Manhattan apartment at the age of 54. His passing marked the end of a tumultuous life that had both captivated and horrified New York. Michael's story isn't just a tale of excess or tabloid-ready scandal. He was a man who mistook notoriety for significance, one who left behind a legacy that remains as controversial as it is cautionary. While Michael's actions were unforgivable, his life serves as a stark reminder of the consequences of unchecked indulgence and the human capacity for not only reinvention, but also self-destruction. Once you join us, there's no getting out. Anyone who betrays the gang will be executed. I'll sleep with my chest exposed. If you want to leave, stab me in the heart. If you can't do that, I'll hunt you to the edge of hell. Such were the words of Kim Gi-hwan as he addressed the 6 men sat in the seedy poker den with him. This band of desperados hadn't just met to play cards, but to start a class revolution, to stamp out societal rot, to form the Chijongpa, a cult-like group of cannibal revolutionaries for whom eat the rich wasn't a slogan, but a very literal order, and a smorgasbord of innocent lives were on the menu. But to begin, we need to take a trip back in time. South Korea. Today, an economic and cultural powerhouse. But that hasn't always been the case. In the 1950s and 60s, it ranked among the poorest countries on Earth. The Korean War had left the peninsula shattered. Cities leveled, families displaced, and an economy on life support. Foreign aid kept the nation afloat, while political chaos and military regimes gripped the government. There were no exports to speak of, little in the way of industry, and hunger was widespread. But then came the 1970s, and things began to shift, quickly. Under a state-led economic model, the government poured resources into infrastructure, heavy industry, and education. Steel, shipbuilding, and electronics became national obsessions. By the 80s, the once run-down nation was filled with neon-lit cities, sprawling highways, and booming factories, all of which were on full display at the 1988 Seoul Olympics. It was then that South Korea became a symbol of speed and success. The middle class was expanding. People were getting rich, fast. But the rural working class? Many were left in the dust. Among them was Kim Gi-hwan, a bright student from a poor family in Pulgab. After losing his father as a toddler, Gi-hwan grew up in poverty, often going hungry and attending school in ragged clothes. Still, he excelled academically and showed potential in both writing and sports. And yet, despite his talents, Gi-hwan was forced to drop out of school in his teens to support his sick mother and brother. He took various factory and coal mining jobs, eventually moving to Seoul in the early 90s, where the widening wealth gap hid him like a glob of spit from a penthouse balcony. Yappies were parading around in designer clothes, and luxury cars filled the streets. It was then that Gi-hwan realized just how little he had, and just how lowly he was perceived by those who passed him by. The dirty peasant in sweat-stained overalls, sleeping on the street after a 16-hour shift. That experience hardened Gi-hwan, but it wasn't until he learned that universities were selling poor students' placements to the wealthy that his bitterness consumed him. In his eyes, society was devolving, and thus he returned home with a plan. To start a gang, a brotherhood with rules, a code, and a purpose. To punish the rich. In April 1993, at an underground poker game, Gi-hwan joined forces with fellow fanatics Kang Dong-eun, Kim Hyun-yang, Kang Moon-seop, Moon Sang-rok, Baek Byung-ok, and Song Bong-woo. This motley crew all shared a few things in common. They all worked low-paying jobs due to a lack of education and past criminal convictions, were all deep in debt due to gambling habits, and crucially, all resented those who had more than them. Around that table, the men vowed to cleanse Korea of its filth, all those who live well, eat well, and walk around with an air of arrogance. After forming their pact, they drew up a list of 3 unbreakable rules. Hate the rich, kill all traitors, never trust a woman, not even your own mother. Originally, Gi-hwan, who fancied himself an intellectual, named this new crew Maskan, thinking it was the Greek word for ambition. Any Hellenic viewers are probably having a good laugh right now, since Maskan doesn't actually mean anything in Greek. He likely confused it with the Arabic word maskan, which means something like house or residence. Given that languages clearly weren't their strong suit, this new gang later rebranded as Chijongpa, which translates to the rather unambitious name, Supreme Gangsters. To prepare for their uprising, the group set a goal: to raise 1 billion won through kidnapping and extortion. They would then use that money, which converted to about $1.2 million, to expand their operation and go on a rampage, mowing down the privileged and educated. But they all agreed that they'd need their first taste of blood in a more controlled environment. On July 18th that year, a 23-year-old bank clerk named Choi Mi-ja was abducted under a train line in Nonsan. Mi-ja, a farmer's daughter who had no affiliation with the group, had been selected completely at random as a practice run. The boys brought her to Mount Jilasan, the nation's second tallest mountain, which they used for endurance training. There, they forced themselves upon her. Once they had finished, Gi-hwan calmly began his lesson. "I'll now show you all how to kill." He then personally strangled Mi-ja in front of his followers. They left Mi-ja's body there on the mountain, and though it was discovered soon after, her slaying wasn't initially linked to the Chijongpa. From the very beginning, it was clear that this rabble of hypocrites were only masquerading as a band of Robin Hoods, when in reality, they were a bunch of robbing Gecks, nothing more than death cultists, motivated not by principles, but bloodlust. That is, with one exception. After taking Mi-ja's life, the youngest recruit, 18-year-old Song Bong-woo, was dogged with guilt and claimed to see her ghost in his dreams. He quickly realized that this wasn't the life he had signed up for, and desperately wanted out. And so, in August 1993, he withdrew 3 million won from the group's treasury and tried to flee. He didn't get far though, and was found hiding at his parents' house just 2 hours later. The rest of the group knocked on his door and pretended to forgive his little indiscretion. Coercing, or perhaps intimidating him into their vehicle, they drove him back to Mount Jilasan under the pretense of a reconciliation dinner. Once there, Gi-hwan reminded his subordinates about those pesky rules that they had all agreed to. And what was rule number 2 again? How did it go? Oh, that's right. Traitors must be killed. Gi-hwan didn't need to give any commands. He watched silently as his obedient followers, now all armed with pickaxes that they had hidden on the mountain, surrounded Bong-woo and began taking chunks out of him. His body was mutilated beyond recognition, then burned and secretly buried. The remaining members had passed their loyalty test and celebrated by roasting a stray dog. Gihuan joked that they had put 2 dogs down that day. As their operations grew, the Chijompa pooled their wages, sold stolen goods, and stocked up on vehicles, guns, and explosives. They transformed Gihuan's mother's house into a base, complete with reinforced walls, underground secret rooms, makeshift prison cells, and an incineration chamber. To their oblivious neighbors, it was just a quirky remodel. Inside, though, it was a slaughterhouse. After finishing their twisted renovation, Kim Gi-hwan would end up being arrested and given a 5-year prison sentence, but not on homicide charges as you might assume. You see, the night before claiming Mija's life, he had SA'd a middle schooler, his friend's niece. Gi-hwan continued directing the gang's activities from prison, ordering them to exact revenge on the police station that brought him in. But to do so, they'd need more funds and more practice. On September 7th, 1994, the gang noticed a Hyundai Grandeur passing through Yangsuri. The vehicle, which they considered a luxury model, obviously belonged to someone extremely wealthy, and so they used their own trucks to block the sedan's path. The Chijompa then tied up and gagged the 2 occupants, 26-year-old Lee Son-young and her 36-year-old boyfriend, Lee Jong-won. They then drove them back to their cremation room for questioning. But during their interrogation, the group realized that they had made a huge mistake. The couple weren't wealthy at all. Son-young worked in a cafe, and Jong-won was a struggling bandmaster. Their car, it turned out, was an older model which they had purchased second-hand. Frustrated, the gang made Jong-won consume copious amounts of alcohol, then placed a plastic bag over his head and forced his girlfriend, Son-young, to help strangle him. Through tears, she placed her hand over his mouth as the others laughed, though of course she didn't actually apply any pressure. And so, with tasers in hand, the Chijompa shocked the life out of Jong-won, leaving several burn marks on his body. Days later, they drove the couple's Grandeur to a ravine, placed Jong-won's body in the driver's seat, and pushed the vehicle over the edge. When the mangled car was discovered the next day, investigators smelt the booze emanating off Jong-won's body and assumed that he had crashed while intoxicated. As for his girlfriend, Son-young, she was kept as a prisoner in the group's hideout for their own personal amusement. On September 13th, the Chijompa captured yet another couple, Soyuno and his wife, Pak Min, whom they had found paying respects at a cemetery. Unlike their last targets though, Yuno did have some money. He was the president of the Samjeong Machinery Company, but the business was a modest one, which he had built from the ground up, and he was still repaying debts associated with his factory's acquisition. Back at their hideout, the gang rigged Yuno's car with dynamite and sent him to collect a ransom of 100 million won, roughly $260,000. Unable to get his hands on that much cash, the businessman called one of his colleagues and told him to get 80 million ready by any means necessary, pretending he needed it for urgent medical treatment. When he went to pick it up, Yuno whispered to his colleague, "I've been kidnapped. Don't follow me." That colleague immediately notified the police about the unfolding situation, but officers fumbled the response, bouncing the case between jurisdictions and not following up on the report. Yuno returned to the hideout with the ransom, expecting to exchange it for his wife's life, but the group had a manifesto to stick to. After handing her a powerful air rifle, the members forced their prisoner, Son-young, to execute Yuno with a shot to the head. His wife, Pak Min, was subsequently butchered with an axe. Their bodies were then dismembered and reportedly served at a neighborhood barbecue mixed with pork. The gang justified the cannibalism as a ritual to help renounce their humanity, and they forced Son-young to consume the flesh of those that she had been made to kill. Now emboldened, the gang sought a more efficient way to target the wealthy. They purchased a VIP customer list from a former credit sales staffer at Hyundai, complete with full names and addresses. This became their hit list. But thankfully, their downfall came before they could start crossing off names. Over the 8 days that she had been locked in their dungeon, Sonyoung had been working her charm on one of the Chichonpa members, the cult's token incel, 22-year-old Hyun Yang. You may recall the group's third rule, never trust a woman. Well, that had been suggested by Hyun Yang himself. He had become resentful of all females when, after the loss of his father, his mother began dating his old man's best friend. Although a misogynist, psychologists say that he actually craved motherly love and projected that onto Sonyoung. Despite being his prisoner, he always addressed Sonyoung respectfully as Miss E, shared personal stories with her on multiple occasions, and had been the one to advocate for her life when his comrades wanted to slay her. Being a smart woman, Sonyoung feigned Stockholm Syndrome, treating Hyun Yang with kindness, biding her time and waiting for an opportunity to escape. And that opportunity came on September 16th, 1994, when, during dynamite training, Hyun Yang injured his hand. Sonyoung consoled him and asked to accompany him to the hospital. There, something strange happened. Hyun Yang gave Sonyoung 500,000 won, around $700 in today's money, as well as a mobile phone. He then asked her, "Do you want to run away? Do you want to escape? Now's your chance." He also reminded her that she was technically an accessory to their crimes, and in the eyes of the law, was just as guilty as the rest of them. Whether this was a way to mock her, or a genuine act of mercy, is debatable, though experts seem to believe this was merely a test. That Hyun Yang truly believed his new mummy had been successfully indoctrinated. What he was too stupid to understand, though, was that Sonyoung was far more mentally strong than the whole of the Chichonpa combined. While Hyun Yang was being treated, Sonyoung fled the hospital, took a taxi, and escaped. But freedom didn't come easy. Sonyoung told the driver to step on it, saying that she was being chased by gangsters. Bizarrely, the driver casually mentioned that he knew all the local thugs, a statement which terrified Sonyoung. She of course feared that he may be part of the Chichonpa. As such, she asked to be dropped off at a nearby vineyard. Using the phone that she had been given, she tried to contact the police, but was repeatedly brushed off, with multiple officers telling her that she wasn't in their jurisdiction and should call someone else. Sonyoung persuaded the vineyard owner to let her rent a car and drove all the way to Daejeon. Worried that the gang would follow, she then switched to a taxi and travelled to Seoul, where she went directly to the Seocho police station and reported everything. Initially, officers dismissed her story, believing her to be a babbling drug addict. But when Sonyoung mentioned how her lover had been tasered, one senior detective recalled the suspicious burn marks that they had found on Jung-won's body. And at long last, the authorities mobilized. On September 17th, the gang recruited Lee Kyung-soo, Dong-yoon's girlfriend, to fill the empty spot in their ranks and fulfill the cooking and cleaning duties. Bad timing for her, as by September 19th, she and the rest of the Chichonpa were arrested. Lucky timing for the cops, as Hyun Yang, who had just disgraced himself by letting Sonyoung escape, was preparing to blow himself apart with stacks of dynamite. The raid on their hideout uncovered their full arsenal of weapons, as well as the cooked remains of their victims within the body incinerator. Each member of the group was charged with 5 counts of murder. Since investigators barely spent a week looking into the case after the arrests, it's entirely possible that there were more victims we still don't know about. As you can imagine, a media circus ensued, with the newspapers referring to the group as South Korea's Manson family. The gang members themselves showed no remorse, telling the media that society was to blame for their rampage. One claimed that he wished he had butchered more. Another bragged about enjoying the taste of human flesh. Prior to their trial, the IQ scores of the Chichonpa were revealed. All of them scored in the low 90s, with the exception of leader Kim Gi-hwan, who scored over 100. Though far from a genius, some speculate that Gi-hwan exploited his slightly higher intelligence to manipulate the others. In fact, some prison inmates and guards later remarked that except for Gi-hwan, the rest of the crew were shockingly naive and simple-minded. Their lack of grey matter did little to elicit public sympathy. But more than the actions of the Chijongpa, South Koreans were outraged by how passive law enforcement had been in handling the situation. This sparked widespread backlash, leading the government to make an example out of the gangsters. After a speedy trial, which concluded on October 31st, all the male members of the Chijongpa were found guilty and sentenced to death. Only the female member, Lee Kyung-suk, was spared, as she hadn't personally taken part in any of the slayings. She was given a 3-year sentence, 1 year for every day she had been a member of the Chijongpa. The others were hanged on November 2nd, 1995. Thankfully, prosecutors didn't indict Sun Young, recognizing that her involvement was under coercion. To keep her out of the public eye, she was provided with a home and employment in the countryside. Unfortunately, the media tracked her down and hounded her for interviews for years thereafter, with journalists desperate to ask her disgusting questions like, "What does human meat taste like?" She would later criticize the near-total lack of meaningful aftercare for crime victims in South Korea. In 2020, it was reported that Sun Young was battling late-stage cancer. Contrary to online speculation, a 2024 broadcast confirmed that she was still alive, had converted to Catholicism, and was still working on finding peace. Even with all the core members of the Chijongpa now gone, the memory of their actions still lingers. The town of Pulgab, where their lair once stood, carries a deep shame, and though the pink house has since been demolished, the horror committed there isn't so easily erased. For years, South Korea debated whether these monsters were made rather than born, and a lot of blame was cast on violent media. Horror movies were censored, and FPS video games were banned from release altogether. Near the end of the 90s, it was broadly accepted that the censorship had gone too far, and that the group's madness was rooted in something darker than pixelated gore. As has become clear, the Chijongpa were rebels with a cause, but without any conviction. They wanted to devour the rich, but all they ever consumed were innocent lives and their own humanity. And 3 decades on, the nation is still digesting what that says about the society which made them. Rachel Morningstar Hoffman was a 23-year-old psychology grad from Tallahassee with a bright future. Smart, bubbly, and known for her fun-loving spirit, she was voted party animal of senior class in high school. That reputation followed her to Florida State University, where she regularly indulged in the devil's lettuce, something that in today's world might get you a slap on the wrist, or no punishment at all, depending where you live. But this was early 2000s Florida, and the law wasn't so forgiving. In spite of her recreational habits, Rachel thrived at college. She earned her bachelor's degree in psychology in 2007 and had plans to attend culinary school the following semester. Not as a fallback, mind you, but as part of an ambitious new idea: to pioneer a form of therapy built around cooking and communal eating. She believed that therapy didn't have to happen in a stuffy office. It could happen over a cutting board, a stovetop, a shared meal. That vision, however, would never come to pass. In April 2008, Rachel was busted for possessing several ounces of Mary Jane and 6 tablets of E. She refused to name her supplier. But instead of letting the charge run its course, police saw an opportunity. Specifically, Tallahassee police officer Ryan Pender took note of Rachel's clean-cut image, her lack of criminal history, and her deep fear of jail time, and decided that she would make the perfect pawn. And so, Pender presented her with a deal: face felony charges and possible prison time, or go undercover in a sting operation to bust some actual hardened criminals. Rachel felt trapped. Her future was on the line after all, and so she agreed. The briefing was short and to the point. Rachel's targets were 2 convicted felons and dealers, Dre Green and his brother-in-law, Daniello Bradshaw. Her mission? Meet with them at Bradshaw's house while wearing a wire. By 1500 E's, 2 ounces of Coca-Cola, and a semi-auto handgun in exchange for $13,000 in marked bills, and return to police headquarters. Rachel had never handled a gun, never bought hard substances in her life, and had zero training in undercover work, and yet she had just been assigned to the largest sting in the department's history. Pender reassured her that the operation would go smoothly, that 19 officers would be watching, that she was totally safe. She wasn't. On the evening of May 7th, police wired Rachel's purse and sent her off alone to meet the dealers. Dressed in blue jeans, a Grateful Dead t-shirt, and black flip-flops, she hopped in her silver Volvo and set off towards Bradshaw's. But almost immediately, things went sideways. While en route, Green and Bradshaw called Rachel and changed the meeting location to Forest Meadows, a nearby park. Rachel, assuming the police were still tracking her, went along with the change. But the area was dense with trees, and the chopper following her overhead lost sight of her. Other officers later admitted that they had assumed someone still had eyes on Rachel, so nobody scrambled to find her, and, still believing that she was being watched, was told to continue with the operation. After a second change in location, Rachel drove towards a nearby plant nursery, about 1.5 miles north of the park. Minutes later, her wire malfunctioned. According to Officer Pender, Hoffman eventually reached him at just before 7 p.m. and said, "I followed them from the nursery. We're on Gardner. It's a dead-end street." He claims to have told her, "Turn around. Turn around. Do not follow them." But the line went dark. Either Rachel hung up, said Pender, or the signal was lost. That's despite the fact that at that same time, Rachel managed to send one final text to her concerned boyfriend. "It's about to go down." By the time officers located and arrived on Gardner Road, Rachel and her car were long gone. In their place, a spent .25 caliber casing, 2 live rounds, and a single black flip-flop. Hours passed with no word from Rachel. The police floated the idea that maybe she had vanished with the money. Later that day, they went to her boyfriend's house, expecting to find her there. But she wasn't. 2 days after Rachel vanished, a body was discovered in a vine-choked ravine near Perry, Florida, a quiet town about 50 miles southeast of Tallahassee. It belonged to confidential informant number 112, aka Rachel Hoffman, wrapped up in her own shirt and a bright orange and purple sleeping bag. She had been shot 5 times in the chest and head with the very gun that the police had sent her to purchase. After the exchange went south, Green and Bradshaw forced her into a stolen BMW, executed her in transit, and tossed her like garbage. Both men were later arrested and admitted to killing Rachel after finding the wire in her purse. They'd suspected something shady was going on from the start. After being found out, Rachel cried into the wire for help, but her screams went unheard. On what would have been Rachel's 25th birthday, Daniello Bradshaw was convicted of first-degree murder. He was sentenced to life without parole, plus 30 additional years. Dre Green pled no contest to second degree and received the same. The grand jury also took the rare step of publicly rebuking the inept Tallahassee Police Department. Tallahassee PD, meanwhile, went into damage control. Police Chief Dennis Jones even went on ABC News and painted Rachel as a lowlife. "Yes," he said, "I'm calling her a criminal."
Rachel Hoffman was committing crimes in the city of Tallahassee. Yes, she was. That's my job as a police chief, is to find these criminals in our community and to take them off the street, to make the proper arrest.
That's in spite of her having never been charged with a crime or having had her day in court. He also went on to blame her for her own murder, stating that she deviated from the original plan by meeting the targets on Gardner Road.
The plan that we had in place was deviated from. It was a change of plans, and unfortunately Rachel decided to deviate from that plan and not meet at the predetermined location.
If she's going off the plan, and she's deviating, or she's nervous, or she's making mistakes, she's a 23-year-old recent college graduate, why didn't your officers move in right then and there and shut the whole thing down?
That would have been ideal.
Why didn't you do it?
Brian, again, the ideal situation.
But my question is, why didn't that happen? Have you asked that simple question?
I haven't asked that question because that's what we're finding out in the investigation.
Why wouldn't you ask that question? Isn't that the whole point here?
When I'm given a chance to ask that question, I will ask that question.
How long has it been since she died?
How long has it been? May the 7th.
Rachel's friends and family didn't let that stand. They fought back, hard. They reminded the public that Rachel had no relationship with the suspects, no knowledge of firearms, no training for what she had been asked to do. They forced the department to admit that she had been catastrophically unprepared, entirely unprotected, and that they had broken guidelines by blackmailing her. Eventually, several officers involved were suspended, with pay, and Officer Pender was fired, only to be rehired shortly thereafter. Many question whether he really told Rachel to abandon the mission only for the wire to go dark, or whether he and his cronies only said that to cover their tracks. Rachel's parents filed a wrongful death lawsuit against the city, eventually winning a $2.6 million settlement and a formal apology from the 19 officers involved, which, up to that point, they hadn't felt the need to give. But their biggest victory came in 2009, when Rachel's law was signed into Florida state legislation. The law established strict protocols for recruiting and using confidential informants. It requires the police to assess an informant's risk, give them access to legal counsel, and, most importantly, actually protect them. Rachel's parents didn't just grieve. They took the worst moment of their lives and used it to stop other families from living the same nightmare. But nothing can undo what happened. Rachel's death was a preventable failure. A young woman was coerced into a dangerous job she had no business doing, all because it was convenient for the police to use her. And then they failed her in every conceivable way. A huge thank you to my supporters here on YouTube and over on Patreon, especially my biggest supporters: Holly Lyons, Thomas Almond, Alana Pons, asiamina, Alicia 1996V, Azrael Warakai, Aðalsteinn Traustason, Colin Monsma, Louthan, Emzetz, Farewelltattoosjaxfl, George Lopez, Gina Valera, Gracearchie, Hamish, John Stuart Muller, Michelle F. Granfield, Mistyblue Longie, Lulgjuraj, TNS Mum, Terry Ford, and Yokai. Thank you guys so much for your continued support. Remember to hit that like button, and I'll see you all again very soon.